Hi there, and welcome to Flip the Script Season 3 in the Weeds, Gaining Investment for Episode 8. So this is on gaining investment, the interdependence theory, the Benjamin Franklin effect, why gaining investment matters, and how exactly you can do it. My name is Becc. I am going to be the guide for today's session. If you do me a favor, if you click on the left-hand side, there is a deck there for you, so you can follow along at each step of the way. And once you've done that, let's go ahead and jump on into the content. So I wanted to start with a bit of an agenda. There's going to be 6 different items to today's agenda. Number 1, we're going to go into interdependence theory. So this is a major psychology theory, and we're going to unpack what it is and the role that it plays in terms of the importance of gaining investment. Number 2, we're going to go into a story about the wonderful Benjamin Franklin and the Benjamin Franklin effect and how that niches into gaining investment with your prospects. And then number 3, we're going to go into how to gain investment with your prospects in terms of booking meetings, gaining investment in prospecting to decrease no-shows. I know that that's a big issue for people in the industry. Gaining investment in selling, and then gaining investment in marketing. So we're going to cover the broad spectrum of go-to-market and how behind how do you gain investment because it's so important based on point 1 and 2. So let's jump in here and let's go into interdependence theory and the role that it plays. So interdependence theory is basically a theory within psychology of how people interact with one another and how they find a relationship valuable, how they evaluate that situation. So essentially, there are 6 different factors that people weigh in whenever they're thinking about whether they should continue in a relationship or the amount that they should invest in a relationship. And this is going to be any type of relationship, whether that's personal, whether that's professional, between friends, between, 2 partners. But there are 6 different variables that people are thinking about whenever they're thinking about, should I value this relationship and should I continue in this relationship? So the first 3 here are going to be, number 1, the amount of investment that you've given so far. Number 2, the amount of alternatives that you have in terms of that type of relationship. Number 3, your level of satisfaction within the relationship. Number 4 is going to be fear of loss, of how afraid are you that you're going to lose this relationship. Number 5, scarcity of the relationship. And number 6, the urgency behind initiating the relationship and continuing on in the relationship. So these are the 6 factors that people consider whenever they're thinking about how much should I value this person in a work context, personal context, etc. And the number 1 factor that drives more decisions, more than almost all of the rest combined, is, you guessed it, number 1. The amount that someone has invested in a relationship so far. So this is why you're going to see that people try to, essentially work through their issues, from a personal perspective, because if they've invested a lot in a relationship, then they don't want it to be all for nothing. You'll also see this come into play if you ever go into Vegas and you see someone sit down at a slot machine and they start to, put coins in the machine. They're trying to win. And even though they've lost a lot of money, one of the reasons that they keep going is they've invested so much into that machine so far that they don't want it to be all for nothing. They want to hit that brink of, okay, I got the payback. And so investment is going to be the level of investment, the severity of that investment, and how the alacrity of that investment, how often it was, and how much they invested either from a time perspective, attention perspective, buy-in perspective, is going to be the main indicator on whether someone's going to continue on in a professional context. So before we go into how that plays into why you need to gain investment from your prospects so much, I'd say from the high level, it's because that will be the main predictor behind whether they continue. Whether that's, they continue from a discovery meeting to a next second call, a phone conversation on the phone into a discovery meeting, or maybe you sent them an email and you want to get them to talk back. How can you get them to continue to invest in the relationship is by gaining the investment from them. So now I want to go into what's called the Benjamin Franklin effect for a little bit of a story time. So everyone gather around for story time. Once upon a time, Benjamin Franklin had a rival. And he wanted to get rid of that rivalry between the two of him and another legislator. So he had an idea of how he could do so. This legislator had a very, very valuable book in his collection. And Benjamin Franklin, the idea that he had was, if I can get some type of relationship with this guy by asking him to borrow his book, and for that guy to do a favor for him, he had the idea that maybe that would form some type of bond. So he went to the legislator that was his chief rival, and he said, can I borrow that book in your library collection? The legislator agreed, gave it to Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin used it and read it for about a month, and then gave it back. And the next time that he saw this legislator, apparently the relationship was completely repaired. Because he had done a favor for Benjamin Franklin, then he was more apt to want to revisit the relationship and to do a favor again. So from the psychology view, there's been a number of studies, and the general myth is, if I do something for someone, then they're more likely to do something back for me. And it's actually, Benjamin Franklin effect proved the opposite. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive, but that if you can get someone to do a favor for you, regardless of how big that favor is, they're more likely to want to continue on in the relationship and to want to do a secondary favor again because of the way that it made them feel. So this positions the person in their mind as a hero in regards to you because they saved you to some degree. They did you a favor, they helped you out, and so they like to see the people that they helped out because in their mind, it reinforces this narrative that they're someone who helps. So when it comes to our prospects and when it comes to prospecting and how this plays in together, the general myth is that if I do a bunch for my prospect, then they're more likely to do things back for me. The reality is it's actually the opposite. If I can drive some small level of buy-in, some small indicator right off the bat that my prospect is going to give in to the process, put some type of value into the process, they're more likely to continue in that sales cycle and relationship than if they hadn't before. So I want to go into how you can gain investment in prospecting in two ways. Number one, to book more meetings and then decrease no-shows. And then we're going to transition into how can you also gain investment within selling and marketing. So gaining investment in prospecting, there's 6 different ideas here of how you can do it. Number one is in the relationship with gatekeepers. So I'm going to use the term gatekeepers. Please, no one send me hate mail. I'm going to use that very affectionately. And what I mean by that is someone who is responsible for either holding the calendar or a level of interaction between a decision maker and the outside world in terms of prospects. So when I call into a gatekeeper, the first thing, my mindset is around how do I leverage this relationship with the gatekeeper to get information otherwise that I wouldn't get, not circumvent the gatekeeper, but pair up and make a team with the gatekeeper, not to get me in front of the decision maker, but to get me information about the organization. So reality is, I've heard a lot of people say like, or the school of thought of, can I get the gatekeeper, to put me on the calendar of my prospect? And I would really think about gatekeepers in the way of, I want to have their back. So their job and their efficacy of their job is how many people did they screen out, not how many people do they let in. So if you're a salesperson and you're calling into a gatekeeper and you're trying to get them to put you on their calendar, you're asking them to do something that's at the deficit of their job. So a decision maker, they might allow it, a couple of times of like, okay, like that makes sense why you let them through. But knowing their KPI system is very important. So oftentimes when I call into gatekeepers, I notice that they want to help me out in some degree. They can't really, and they don't want to put me on the decision maker's calendar because that's, again, something that they're paid to screen out. But is there any other way that this gatekeeper could help me? And usually what you're going to find is gatekeepers are a wealth of information. They know a lot about the org. They know a lot about decision makers. They know a lot about their day, the kinds of people they talk to, the things that they're struggling with. And so the first thing that I would do is if I do get a gatekeeper, meaning someone who's not the final decision maker, I would ask them within reason for information about the business. Now, the types of things that the decision maker runs into, who are the types of vendors that they're working with so far, have they covered an initiative, what kind of background tech do they have, for instance. But I would ask the gatekeeper for information, number one, because you can use and leverage the valuable information. But number two, when that gatekeeper is giving you that information, they're giving you investment. So it makes them more likely and more up from the psychology view to want to continue to do that and root for you within the sales process that you do get a meeting with this decision maker. So this is really a form of how you can ally with the gatekeeper. So where they're rooting for you that you get time with the decision maker at the end of the day. Number two, if you can leverage either the gatekeeper or an individual contributor, either one will work in this case scenario. But if you have some type of free trial product or a small product that is used tactically within the day-to-day, I have in the past leveraged a gatekeeper or an individual contributor to put that product into play in the environment that it's in so that people can use it so you can get exposure. So let me give you an example. I recently was working with someone who is essentially selling gloves into dentists and dentist office. And he came to me and he said, I want to go through this playbook. Why is this messaging playbook not working? So on and so forth. And I said, well, what are some of the things that you're trying? He said, well, I'm sending some of these gloves, for instance, we have a free trial amount, and I'm sending them, just to the office. And I said, what are you telling them to do with these gloves? And he said, well, nothing. I said, well, there's your problem. One of the problems of why don't we do this? Send the gloves to someone very specific at the org, find either the person who's at the front desk, someone who's a dental hygienist, and send these gloves to them. Be very, very researched on what you do, and basically have the CTA ask them to use these gloves within the day-to-day and to pay attention to one element. And so one of the elements or problems that they solve for essentially was a lot of times gloves can get super expensive, but when people try to go a cheaper option, they get too thin and they break, or they were causing rashes on people's skin. So I said, send these gloves to the gatekeeper or an individual contributor, so to speak, someone who's a dental hygienist, and ask them to use these gloves in their day-to-day and to pay attention to one thing. How do their hands feel at the end of the day? Or how many pairs of gloves broke in comparison to their pre-existing gloves. So this is a way that you can get someone to essentially use your product, and essentially it's for free, meaning they don't have to give you any money, they don't have to give you a meeting, but they're giving you some level of buy-in if they're putting your product into play on the floor. So if you have some type of option for that, either a free trial, a small amount of product, then I would use that into play so that they've notched up their investment that they've given to you. That to some degree, they put their name on the line of like, hey, everyone, I think it's a good idea to use this. So that it's more likely that they want to continue in that relationship with you and potentially evaluate something like the gloves. Number three, having a prospect agree to a prospect pack. So I go into this, if you go into the core sessions in cold call, the 7 steps to having an electric cold call, I go into a prospect pact. And what a prospect pact is, it's an agreement with you and your prospect of what's going to happen over the next 20 seconds. And I usually list some type of give and some type of get. And so a great example would be, how about this? And this would be on a cold calling proclivity. If you said, how about this? You give me the next 20 seconds to give you my best dog and pony show on who we are, who Flip the Script is, and why I thought we might be a good fit for you and your team over at Oracle. And at the end of that 20 seconds, you can tell me whether it makes sense to continue the conversation from there. Does that sound good? And what I found is typically you're going to see 90 to 95% conversion at that point. If I had to guess, meaning people will let you pitch. And if I had to guess why, I think it's because you're doling out the respect of an opt-in process. So this is a way in a very small manner to get your prospect to say yes to something. So once they say yes, once they put in that first quarter in Vegas, they've inserted some level of investment. So it's going to depend on the severity of the level of investment, but the more investment that they make, the more likely they're going to want to continue in that relationship. So if they gave you 20 seconds for or 20 seconds to give you your best elevator pitch, it's more likely that they will want to hear more about the product on the back end after you've talked to them for 5 or 10 minutes, and uncovered a couple of facts about their business. Number 4, asking advice from your prospects. This is a great thing to do. So kind of like we talked about earlier, people like to be the hero. And I think that that's a wonderful thing. Constantly, I will see people trying to help out one another, and they like to do that because it means they were valuable to someone else. So going to a prospect and saying like, maybe you were unsuccessful and you were trying to get a meeting with someone else, and you come back to the first prospect. Maybe the first prospect said, I'm not the right person, and they truly weren't. You called outside a buyer persona. You go to the second person, and then you come back and you ask advice. Like, hey, I must have missed the mark with Mike because I tried, getting a hold of him, and I didn't get any traction there. If I come back to the first prospect and say, any advice on where I should head from here? If they've given you any type of advice in the past, it's going to increase the fact that they're going to want to make that meeting with Mike happen. So trying to get some type of advice from the prospect can be very, very valuable. Another way to do it, and I did this back in the day, but essentially when I started Flip the Script, it was just an after-hours series. And I knew that I had a core job from 8 to 5. And I knew that I had to get some meetings booked, within for my team, within the 8 to 5. So I essentially sent out an email to a lot of enterprise companies, and all I asked was one question. And this was just an instinct that I was like, I'll see if this works. I sent out like 50 emails to an enterprise company, and I did this to multiple enterprise companies. And I basically said, hi, I know you don't know me, but my name's Becc, and I went into a quip on personalization. And then I said, I was calling, or I was emailing you to see if I could ask for some level of advice. I know that you don't owe me this, but let's say Dell. Dell is a very big org, and I'm looking for this type of person that deals with this. Would you be willing to send me any kind of direction? And the amount of meetings that I got from that email was uncanny. I was basically just approaching people out of the blue at an enterprise org and being like, hey, can you help me navigate this? And I remember that one of the prospects at a very, very well-known company jumps on the line to help me out. And we later closed the deal based off of this. But he basically jumps on the line and he said, I'm here to help Becc, and I don't really know why. And he said, so I jumped on the line. I talked to him for 5 or 10 minutes. He passed me on to another person, booked the meeting, closed the deal. Point being, if you can get some type of advice from your prospects, again, this is going to, because you're doing something valuable for them in the process. You're asking them for their expertise, and you're giving them the chance to help someone. So it builds a positive narrative for in their own head of they did something good today. So asking for advice is going to increase the level of investment once they give you that advice, and encourage them to continue on in the relationship. Number 5, asking for help from someone from the organization to navigate, kind of like we just went into. And then number 6 here is asking the prospect or gatekeeper, once they do give you advice, or once they do help you out, or once they do give you direction, to wish you luck. I do this very, very commonly. You'll see on LinkedIn, if you ever see some of my posts, I'll say like, hey, I'm going into the studio to film today. Wish me luck. And just getting people to say that to you, it teams you up with them. So it's nice to have a team when you're going into something, really difficult. So getting the gatekeeper, after you get the advice from them, after you get the prospect, to give you some type of advice, I would encourage you to say something like, wish me luck, so that they're mentally on the same team as you. So here's number 7 is going to be asking if they're willing to reference that you talk to others internally. So let's say that I had called into someone, they said that they weren't the right person, and they gave me direction on who someone was in the organization that they thought the right person was based on what you said. I would ask, if they're not willing to make an introduction, if they say like, hey, I actually don't know this person, well enough to make an introduction, or they don't want to put their neck on the line that far, so to speak. I would ask if that person is willing that you just mention their name. Now, I'd be very careful here to say something like, I'm not going to tell them that you back our product. I'm not going to tell them that you looked at it or you support it. But if you wouldn't mind, this is sales. You know how this goes. Would you mind if I just mentioned your name, to make sure that it's a little more likely that I get in front of them? So again, this is going to be your prospect putting their neck on the line, so to speak, a little bit. So once they put their name into the bandwagon, then they're more likely to want to continue to help you in that process if you can get them to help you the first time. Number 8, getting information from individual contributors to approach a decision maker. I do this play quite a bit. I call it the quote unquote groundswell play, where I'll go to someone who's an individual contributor. Let's say that downloaded a white paper, and I'll start talking to them. I'll strike up a conversation. I won't go after anything, with them, but I'll say, hey, so I'm actually hunting after blank. I'm not going to make you be a part of that. I'll spare you that. But if you wouldn't mind, can you give me a couple of answers to a couple of questions? So you can ask any type of information that you want. What kind of methodology are you using in terms of your cold calls? Do you have a cold call structure from a scale of 1 to 10? How positive are you where you're going to go if someone gives you an objection of, I'm running into a meeting right up front? Or who's writing your templates or your emails that you're sending out? Or what kind of sales engagement instance are you using? So these are just a couple of examples for me. But if you call into a quote unquote groundswell, meaning an individual contributor, and just gather information about the organization, and then sometimes they'll even either A, pass you along, or B, let you mention that you talked to them. Worst case scenario, you go into that conversation with the decision maker with a lot of more up-to-date information. So this can be really, really valuable. I call it the quote unquote groundswell play. And I think if I had to guess why people don't do this play very often, is they think people who are groundswell offer no value to the sales process. I couldn't disagree more. So there's a common myth in the industry that you have to have the decision maker as a part of the buying process, to get a deal across the line. And I do think that it's important to have some level of access to authority, but I cannot tell you the amount of deals that I've closed with meeting the decision maker near the end. And if I had to guess why they closed so effectively, was because I was valuing, the quote unquote groundswell, like the frontline managers or the second line managers or the people who weren't signing off at the final gate. So it's definitely valuable to have access to the DM some point during the process. But I think valuing the quote unquote little guy, so to speak. So I would always encourage people, regardless of who the person is within the org, treat them with respect, lead with value, and try to have a great conversation with them, so that they return that with respect. Number 9, if you ask people for a statistic. So if you cold call into someone, and you start asking them questions, usually one of the common sins that I see on cold calls is people just start asking very leading questions, trying to get you to take the meeting. But if you are successful in asking problem-based questions, sign-based questions, which I go into in symptoms, signs, problems, and pains, or the 7 deadly sins of questions if you want to see more, but within this season. But if you ask people these open-ended questions and you're gathering information about their background, trying to hunt for, do they have a problem that we solve for? If you ask them as a follow-up, like, hey, I know that you're not in front of your computer now, but if you wouldn't mind, would you look within your CRM and check a great one for me that I typically do is would you check for people who requested a demo, how many people actually got into a first meeting? Just that number of conversion. And that conversion point is important to me because I want to know, are they having the problem of their churning prospects due to a muddy inbound process? But the other thing that I found that does is that person just going back and getting that piece of information and returning and telling that to me is valuable, that they feel like they're bought into the process now. So again, because of interdependence theory and because the Benjamin Franklin effect, I've put something into this pot. So I want to continue on going because I've done one favor off the gate. The last 2 here are in expansion selling, and then we can go into how it decreases no-shows. But within expansion prospecting, so to speak, of you've already sold into this company, but I want to, get another meeting going in a different department or with a different leader within the same department that I've sold into, asking the current buyer, whoever bought your software or product or service the first time, if you could use their name to cross-sell. I do this very frequently, and I'd say asterisk mark. I don't have too much time to go into expansion selling now, but you need to make sure that you have done well by your decision maker. Sometimes I laugh because it seems like very normal statements, but they're very important because I don't see it done very, well that often, is the candid truth. So I would make sure that the prospect, the current buyer, whoever I'm talking to, has seen a lot of value, from the current engagement. And if not, I would dig into why. What did I miss? What problems were they trying to solve that I didn't solve for? And then, and if you do have a great relationship of like, hey, Alex, do you mind if I reach out, if I use your name? I was going to reach out to Sarah because of X, Y, and Z. Would you mind if I just briefly mentioned your name? I won't overdo it, but mention that we had worked together in the past. So just Alex giving you his name, to use is a piece of investment. So letting them use your name, having some type of buy-in internally, again, it's going to increase the investment that they're giving. So it's going to increase the likelihood that they're going to want to continue on. Number 11 is if this one is within the same department. So you're going to have a more likely that people are going to want to do this there because they usually know someone if it's within the same department. So let's say that I had sold into LinkedIn sales solutions, and I had sold into a VP of sales, and now I wanted to sell into LinkedIn sales solutions, but the VP of sales development. So they're within the same department. So can I use the first buyer to the second buyer? They're within the same department. This second type in number 11 is I sold into LinkedIn sales solutions, let's say to the VP of sales, and now I want to sell into LinkedIn marketing solutions or talent solutions. So I want to cross-sell across the department. So usually they won't know these people as well, obviously because it's cross-departmental. But if it's a main decision maker, what you'll find is there's some type of relationship from program head to program head, just especially if they're peers. So the higher up the food chain, quote unquote, that you are, the more effective this is going to be. But if I can get them again to just say that I can use their name, it's going to be more likely that they're going to want to continue on. That if I can't get a hold of this person in Talent Solutions, they're going to want to help me by way of doing something about it. So number 4, gaining investment in terms of decreasing no-shows. So that was all for prospecting of how I can leverage it to help me book more meetings. Now I want to go into how you can get it to decrease no-shows. So I've seen a number of different statistics on no-shows in the industry. Typically, you're going to see a roughly double no-shows over cold call than you are over email. If I had to guess why, it's because if someone doesn't want to take a meeting and you're emailing them, they just don't respond. There's no emotional tax to them. Over cold call, sometimes we just want to feel like a nice person, so we go ahead and agree to something when we weren't planning on showing up because we wanted to feel like a nice person, but we also don't want to show up to the meeting. So either way, no shows, you can churn anywhere up to 35. I've seen actually 60% on the high end of people no showing a meeting. This was for a more tactical in the field type person. So obviously they're more likelihood to agree to something, just to get out of it. But 35% is a very real average mean statistic. And so if we're trying to book a lot of pipeline and then churning out 35% to no-show, the faster way, instead of trying to go get more, is to address this issue of no-shows. So how you can gain investment to decrease them. Number 1 is within the cold call, I would ask them if there is something that they would like to cover. So usually I am going into the elevator pitch. If you want to know more about the cold call, again, if you go into the written hub, I have 7 steps to an electric cold call, or the core sessions within the free sales training hub. I go into the entire cold call front to end. But right near the end, even when they've agreed to the call, I always encourage teams to ask them, I'm like, if you're going to forget everything on the back end of this call, remember one thing. Ask them, what else? What else would they like to cover on the meeting on Thursday that they've agreed to? So number 1, if they aren't going to show up, it's going to give you a litmus test on how apt they are to show up. If they don't have a reason, to show up for the call, it's a very, very likely high candidate for no-show. But I want to increase buy-in. So again, if my prospect puts into the pot and says, yeah, I want to cover X, Y, and Z, that would be great. And I get them to be savage, like very, very hungry to get this type of data point. So again, it increases their investment in the call. So it increases the likelihood that they will show up to the next call. Number 2, I would ask if it's all right. Let's say that you have a second call and there are other stakeholders on the call. This specifically happens within enterprise selling all the time. Very consistently, I'd say about 85% of my deals, specifically within the enterprise space, the second meeting that I'll have will be with 3 or 4 people that I've never met before. So something that you can do to increase not only the efficacy with these the other decision makers that will be on the call, but also increase the inherent quality of the relationship with the person that you originally talked to, is ask them if it's all right, if you reach out to these other decision makers before the meeting. So I'd say, hey, I noticed that Casey and Tim and John are going to be on the next call. I hope I'm not being too pushy here. Would you mind if I reach out to them, just supply them a quick agenda for the meeting, introduce myself, so it wasn't such a brash introduction right off the bat. I would encourage you to ask your first person, and I would tell them like, hey, it's not going to be anything big. I'm not going to ask them for anything. I just wanted to introduce myself and send them over a couple of things so they're best prepped for the meeting. So I would triple asterisk mark that you should do that before reaching out to these other people. I've seen a number of different sales advice on LinkedIn to go ahead and send out different collateral to these other decision makers before the next meeting. Very, very valuable. But the number one way to blow trust, meaning if you want to completely trash the relationship that you currently have, the number one way to do it, Brigham Young did a study, is to circumvent someone. So you're better off lying to your prospect's face, or you're better off not delivering on what you said you would do than you are circumventing them. So I'd keep that in mind with these other decision makers. So the way that you can get buy-in is just getting them to say, yeah, no problem, and then taking it, by way of there. So this is a way to get a small amount of investment so that they're even more invested on the next call. Number 3, on the original call or the cold call, if you could have them circle back, and this is within selling, not within necessarily, not necessarily just prospecting, but if you can ever have them get a data point. So again, if you're on that cold call, if you've been having a great back and forth, I would ask them, and they've agreed to a discovery call, I would say, hey, would you mind, whenever we show up on Thursday, if you could bring the data point of this piece, that would be very helpful. And I would ask them for 1, 2 max, and you want it to be very low lift. So you want to communicate to your prospect that this could be valuable to them, but it needs to be low lift in the beginning, because the reality is you haven't added that much value yet at this stage of the game. You're a prospector. So typically what I see is you haven't given a ton into this relationship. So I wouldn't make the withdrawal too heavy of 6 different data points they need to bring, but just one data point that's important to you will increase their level of investment and increase their likelihood they'll continue on in the relationship. And number 4, encouraging them to bring other decision makers. So let's say the first person that you talk to, they're going to jump on the next call, and they said, hey, we want to go deeper within discovery. They agreed to a discovery call. I would encourage them of like, hey, other than yourself, is there anyone else that you think would be a part of something like this that you might see would grab value from the meeting? So I'd be very, very light of this. I'd be cognizant of not risking what I currently have. So you don't want to churn your current meeting by way of making them feel like it's not valuable enough. But if you can bring up in a light manner, if you think that someone else needs to be a part of this process, I'd obviously love for them to come. So the more you get someone to put their name on the line by inviting other people to a call, giving you a data point, putting a product in front of them, the more likely that they're going to continue on investing in the relationship after that. So number 5, let's go into selling, and then we're going to close out with marketing. So within selling, very similar to the last one, after you have your original discovery, though, within selling, I would have them bring back multiple data points. So this is in the case scenario of not the cold call to the discovery call, but the discovery call to the demo, so to speak, of like when you're displaying your product. I would have the prospects bring back a data point. So there's a number of different data points that you can go after. If you're asking the right types of questions, then you're very, very intrinsic on them. So your discovery, from a high level, from my perspective, should be 45 minutes, and you shouldn't really be talking at all. So if a lot of people ask me, like, how do I increase conversion within selling? And I'm like, well, a quick tip is, just as a litmus test, if your first call with someone, you're talking more than 10% of the time, then that's the problem. So true discovery, you have to discover things about them. So you want to know, what are the problems they're running into that they're trying to solve? When they say they need something, is it legitimate? Like, do they actually need that to solve the problem that they're after solving? And if you don't know the problem they're after solving, then, you don't know. You can sell them something, but you don't know if it will solve their problem. So point being, in the first discovery call, I would have them bring back to you a couple of data points to increase their level of investment. Having prospects bring back a sample of something. This is a great example for me that I typically do is within the discovery call. I'm asking a lot of questions. First, why are we here? What's the pain? What hurts, essentially. I'm asking different KPIs, how people are doing against that KPI. What's their email activity volume, cold call activity volume, etc. What's the how much personalization are they including within the emails? And then within Discovery to Demo, I ask them, I say, hey, would you mind, could you queue up the last 5 emails, for instance? Like, if I queue in and I notice that they have a 1% response rate, and they are 60% of their quota, for instance, I know that the problem is likely email, but I want to take a look on what are the problems that they're running into over email. So I ask them, like, hey, can you bring me back 4 or 5 emails, just so I can get a good taste. So again, this great way not only to get information so you can diagnose and prognose effectively, but also it helps you drive investment on their end. Number 3, having them agree to a prospect pack. So again, this is within selling. So this would be on the first discovery call. So a prospect pack can be used in the beginning of a cold call. The prospect pack can be used at the beginning of any type of meeting, but really it's an agreement between you and your buyer, prospective buyer, on what's going to happen in the next, the next 30 minutes or the next hour. So having them do any kind of buy-in, say any kind of yes along the way, again, increases that investment. It makes them want to keep going. Number 4, having them share internal statistics. So anytime someone gives you information about their organization, it is a gift. It might be an earned gift, but it's still a gift. Our prospects are choking back information more than ever before. Their pains, their problems, things that's going on to them at their org. And the reason is, number 1, they don't know how you're going to use it. But number 2, the more that you know that they have a problem, the more they know that you can either increase the price or you can sell them based on it. So it is our job, part of our job within selling, is to get them to realize, not by telling them, but realize that they can trust us. Trust us to not harm them with information, trust in our ability to help them when they do give us information, and trust us on the reliability that we'll deliver when we say we're going to do something we said we would do. So when they give you information, usually I'll see prospects testing salespeople, specifically SDRs, within prospecting, that they'll ask a question. They'll say something like, so I was curious to know if you've ever come across Flip the Script before. And you'll hear your prospects go, yeah. And what they're doing there is they're testing you. They're saying, I'm going to give you a piece of information, and let's see if you keep going and keep trying to nail me with the pitch, or if you stop there and start to ask questions. You'll hear this at the beginning of cold calls all the time. Someone will say, hey, this Becc calling on a recorded line with Flip the Script. How have you been? And they'll go, good. And the reason they're saying that is they're testing you. They want to see, are you going to stop the conversation there like a normal human being should? And you're going to say something like, hey, can I level with you? You don't sound that great. Did I mess up in calling you? But 99.9% of the time, I hear reps blow through. They're like, good. Well, the reason for my outreach is it's like they just gave you a massive emotional cue right at the beginning. So like it is jarring to me we're very smart. meaning we watch a movie and just by how someone changes their eyes, we're like, that person's a killer. Or that person loves that person or doesn't love that person. And then we pick up the cold call phone and we're like, we completely lose our ability to read any cues. Someone says, I'm good. And we're like, great. Well, the reason for my outreach is X, Y, and Z. Or someone sounds happy. I'm great. We're like, good. Well, the reason for my outreach is, and we rip them straight back into Salesville. So point being, when they give you information, it is a test to you on the, can they trust you with this information? So getting them to share some type of internal information is a level of buy-in. So the more information that they give you, the more to somewhat bonded you all are. So I'd encourage them to give you information. Getting them to give you access to internal systems, this is going to be a big marquee of trust. I remember, this might be a random story, but I remember I had this dog when I was growing up, Scout. So I called her Cow Cow off of To Kill a Mockingbird. Anywho, Scout was not a dog that cuddled up to you. She was a lab, and she oddly enough did not like water, did not like fetching. And she wasn't super, happy every time you came in the door. She was happy to people that she knew. But she was kind of like a cat to some degree of like, she opened up to you slowly over time. And I remember at one point, one of my friends came over in high school. This was in high school. And Scout had only seen her a couple of times. And essentially, for some reason, she cuddled up next to her and she turned over and it kind of opened up her belly. And I gasped. And my friend couldn't figure out why. And I'm like, it's because that means she trusts you. She trusts you enough to be, open to you that you could hurt her right now. And so point being, someone giving you access to internal systems, it's a hallmark of trust. Of like, how much do I trust this person? So if you can't get information from your prospects, if you can't get access to internal stakeholders, if you can't get access to any kind of internal systems, if they won't tell you the truth, if they won't open up to you about when the true timeline is, for good or better or for worse, or they're evaluating competitors, all litmus signs that they don't trust you. They see you as a typical seller because they don't know what you're going to do with the information. So I'm trying to gauge how much they trust me. It's a litmus test to me on if I show up to a meeting, for instance, and there's 3 people there that I didn't know were going to be there, and I find out something in a meeting, it means that they didn't trust me enough beforehand to tell me. So, good indicator to look after. Getting buy-in to talk to others internally. Again, this is a display of trust, but also something that will increase their level of investment. And then number 7 here is getting to talk to others internally, but leaders. So this is even heavier. Getting to talk to individual contributors, is one piece. Getting to talk to leaders is even bigger. Again, both are going to be hallmarks, that they trust you in some level of buy-in, and also going to increase the likelihood that they'll continue to invest. So let's go into marketing, how you can gain investment in marketing, and then we're going to close out for the day. So this is pretty simple. Number 1, having leads put in their email address for content at some level. It has to be a functioning email address. This is a way to get their name in the pot, so it's not just all, free dark web, so to speak. Requiring a business email address instead of a personal email address. So if you're watching this, you'll notice that you had to put in a business email address to get access to the video. And the reason is, to some degree, is I'm like, hey, this should be, from my perspective, some level of give and take of like, you can trust me with your email address. I promise I won't blast you into the heavens, with all these kind of nurturing campaigns. But the reason I'm requiring a business email address is I'm like, there needs to be some level of buy-in from my perspective. Otherwise, the content won't essentially, help you if you don't watch it. So I'm after, can I get some small investment from someone up front, and if I can get that small investment, I'm going to try and over deliver as much as I can, as many videos as they want, access to all of them for free, et cetera, et cetera. But I want some small level of buy-in from the marketing perspective. Requiring someone to put in their phone number, that's even bigger. I don't do that, but that's even bigger, more way to gain investment. Having them put in a data point of how they're doing internally. So I've actually seen this leverage quite well. Here's an industry statistic of, for instance, I see anywhere from 6% to 25% on the high end of people who request a demo actually get a demo or actually get a first meeting with someone because of process. Pretty jarring. I go into it in a couple other episodes, specifically within the season episode, I believe 15. 15 or 10. I go into it on BANT and the sales 4-letter word. But point being, I could publish that and then say, if you put in that data point here, and we'll tell you how you're doing against the industry, and then a couple plans of how you could fix it. That's a way to get them to put in some type of data point so it drives more investment on the back end. So again, usually within a marketing process, it should be tiered of like, give me a small investment here, then a bigger investment here, and then a bigger investment here. So you aren't asking for this big investment right up the gate. You're just kind of asking for the small next yes. And then number 5 here is having someone hook in their internal systems for a free trial. This is a great way to sell a freemium product or a free trial product. Is they have to essentially integrate some type of their data or system to get access to that free trial or to get access to that freemium instance. So again, it gives them some level of buy-in that they have to give you. They have to, maybe put their contacts into something, or they have to hook in their CRM to something. And so because they've given that one small piece of investment, it's more likely that they'll continue on with you, even if they at one point are like, okay, if I'd known all of this, I probably wouldn't have done it. It's a good way to piecemeal people in of like, get a small investment each piece along the way, as opposed to just asking for everything up front. So in summary, our prospects and people in general are people who love to help. And so I would try to open up the gate to that of people who want to help you. Number 1, gives you some information, but number 2, it drives them investing in you. So the earlier on in the process and the more aggressive that you can get and more intentional you can get about getting some level of investment, whether that be small or medium size, from your prospect along the way, it will drive more efficacy that on the back end, that they will continue to invest in the relationship and see you as a valuable source and asset within the selling process. So that's everything. Thanks so much for watching. If you like this session and you want to do us a favor, if you go to LinkedIn, tag me and Flip the Script and let me know all the things that you want to hear more of and all the things that you want me to stop doing. Just kidding, but I really love feedback, so it'd be very, very helpful. But either way, I appreciate you tuning in today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.